You go back and look in the 50s and 60s and you go look at trains, and there's all these businessmen with papers up in front of their faces. While they weren't looking at their screens, they were still disconnected. They still weren't connecting with one another. And so that's where I think we have to stop thinking of technology as just simply digital technology. One of the most revolutionary pieces of technology is actually the printing press. It changed everything about Europe. It changed everything about the church even. And that idea about how technology alters us, it changes us, it shapes us, it disciples us. It changes how we view God.
Pastor Dale has been burning the candle at both ends for weeks. His wife, Avery, is frustrated. She needs some time alone with her husband. They have not had an extended conversation in a month. They finally find a Sunday they can get away. They line up an outside preacher, a highly respected commentator, speaker, and preacher. He comes into the pulpit, and as they are away on their trip, enjoying a wonderful hike, they come into cell service only to find 7 text messages responding to one thing he said in the pulpit on Sunday. Suddenly, their vacation is over. Every pastor I know, every pastor's wife I know, knows the terror of this moment. That's what we're talking about today on The Glass House, the always-on availability of pastors and how they respond to information that in this digital age is everywhere. On the episode today, we've got Jason Thacker with us, who leads research at the ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission, and has written a book with us called Following Jesus in a Digital Age. This topic today relates to pastors and wives, mostly in the category of fear. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about fear of not knowing enough with all the information flying around that pastors and wives, like what's at the middle of that, Lynley, that we are constantly afraid we're missing out on something?
Well, I mean, I don't know what it is for everybody else, but for me, the fear of missing out is just, what if I look silly? What if something happens and I don't know? What if something tragic has happened and I've, taken the liberty to spend an hour disconnected from my phone? And so there's just this constant fear of we should know how to handle something. But again, we talk about this in the episode, is that nobody has ever pastored in the digital age. And so we're all learning. And there has to be some grace with our churches, with our staff, of figuring out, okay, I'm scared I'm going to miss something, but I'm also human and I have to stop for a little bit.
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint people because different people have expectations of me in communication, and their expectations are different. One person sends a text message, and if I respond 2 days later, they're fine. Other people are upset if 10 minutes later they haven't gotten a response. So everybody has different expectations on the speed of communication, and people in ministry feel stuck to their phones, like they can't get away from them. They can't unplug, and yet they also realize the importance of communicating.
Well, and I mean, to kind of play off of this, one fear I have about this episode is that people will turn it off immediately, thinking that we're talking about social media only. And so, I mean, listen in, because we are talking about just the ways people can contact you. I mean, you said it a second ago, you feel like you have 9 different inboxes. Yep. Because you have a Lifeway email and a Gmail email and a DMs and all kinds of things. And so, I just fear that we get turned off by the term social media and don't listen to just all the effects that this digital age has on us.
We used to have office lines. We used to tell people to call me at the office. That's gone.
Yeah.
Now we have cell phones. We give them out to everybody because that's how it works. When that many people have your information, they're going to fire off some texts. They're going to fire off some emails without even thinking. How do pastors and wives respond in a godly way, but also a balanced way? That's what the conversation today is about. Jason, great to have you on the show. Why don't you tell our guests a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you came into this subject of the digital revolution?
Yeah, it wasn't something I ever really planned per se. So I kind of backed my way into it. The Lord had very different plans than I did when I was growing up. But I grew up surrounded by tech. I'm a little old to say that, which is kind of funny because my dad actually worked for a Fortune 500 tech company. And so I was always very familiar with technology. But it wasn't until really college and seminary, I originally felt the Lord calling me into the local church, into pastoral ministry, specifically church planting. Had big high dreams and kind of where he was taking us. But in a very kind of weird turn of events, I ended up here in Nashville working for the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission, which is essentially the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And there I served in communications for a while before shifting over into full-time research and really full-time ethics, which is kind of my passion. It's where my heartbeat is. Love seeing that ethics is essentially just discipleship. It's like, what do we do in light of what God has said? And so that's kind of how I backed my way into a lot of the technology stuff, specifically because I was interested in it. And then I was also reading books, and there weren't a lot of Christians engaging these subjects. And when they were engaging them, it at times felt it was very kind of shallow at times. It was, here's 5 checklists, kind of 5 tips to right your relationship with technology. And as I was reading a lot of kind of secular literature, I was realizing there's a lot more here that we really need to unearth and unpack as Christians, because technology is shaping the way we view the world.
Yeah. Lynley, let's talk a little bit about why we thought this topic was extremely relevant for ministry families.
Oh, yeah.
We were just plowing through your book a little bit together, and we were like, if ministry families struggle with any one thing, it's the constant bombardment of new information that's coming in mainly through our devices.
Well, and I want to clarify, when we were talking about this, and Ben was telling me about your book about being in the digital age, I just automatically went to social media and not thinking through all the digital thing. But then Ben and I began to kind of discuss, like, what would it have been to have been a pastor before cell phones? I mean, I can't even imagine, because I feel like maybe at that point you probably could have turned it off a little bit, but I think it's almost impossible now as a pastor to turn your phone off, because there's that fear of, what if there's a tragic incident? What if someone whose family member is on their deathbed, is trying to get a hold of us? And so there's constant, and then also the constant emails to pastors and families about, well, our Sunday school teacher didn't teach the lesson like he was supposed to, and what are you going to do about it, pastor, kind of thing. And so, I mean, I just don't even know this day and age how you can even possibly turn it off. So I'm curious to hear, like, what you learned in your research about all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly one of the biggest challenges of kind of the digital age we have. And we often think of technology, we think of kind of immediately of smartphones, social media, and there are real challenges there. But I think as Christians, we kind of have to step back a little bit and ask some of the bigger questions of what technology is, how it's shaping us, and how it's really not a separate set of issues. It's actually connected to all of the issues we face in ministry. You can't, as you said, really turn it off. You can't actually disconnect in many ways. And even when you try, often it still kind of bombards through. You still get an email, you still get a phone call or a text message or something like that. And that's one of the things I think one of the reasons I wanted to write this book was to step back and ask some of these bigger questions of what is technology, how is it forming and shaping us as people, and then how as Christians do we respond to that? Because I think specifically for ministry leaders, we're just overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information that we take in each day, whether it's social media, whether it's emails, it's phone calls, it's mail, it's, knocks on the door, it's social media messages, it's notifications. We're just inundated. It's news services, cable news, it's everywhere. We're just kind of inundated and overwhelmed with the amount of information, and we simply cannot process it all.
We can't. And what's happening is, and this happens in my home on a daily basis, is we're home with our kids, but the whole time we're with them, we're in our head thinking about the text that just came through that we probably shouldn't have looked at after hours. But now I'm putting a puzzle together in my head while my kids are talking to me, and I'm not hearing a word they're saying. I think more and more ministry families are having a hard time drawing the boundary between work and home, because the information is, people can complain anytime they want.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to know how to react. Let's talk about the chronic pressure to respond. Many pastors feel like they live on an adrenaline rush. They're constantly reacting to the latest incoming urgent message. We have some thoughts here if you're a church-going person and you're thinking about emailing your pastor.
We are actually speaking on behalf of your ministry staff, what they wish they could say to you in this moment, kind of thing.
And this also applies to your school principal or to your kid's teacher.
Or their coach.
Here are some general principles, having been on the other side of it, that we just listed that we think might be helpful. You want to take the first one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so first thing is just, can it wait until office hours? Can you wait and pause and send that message during the daytime? Because, I mean, just be respectful of the pastors. They have a family. They are tired. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Sunday morning or Sunday at noon to send a text about something you didn't enjoy in the sermon is not a good time. Maybe Monday's probably their day off, or Friday, so maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are safe times. Just think about when you're sending a message.
Yeah, and think about his kids, if he's got a young family. If you fire off that text or email right now, he's probably sitting on the couch with his kids. Do you want him reading that while he's with his family on Sunday afternoon or Sunday night?
Or he's an older man who has grandkids. I mean, don't...
Yeah, just think about the family,
Yeah.
the impact on the family. Number 2, think about the way you open the message, the first line. You know, we talk about the sandwich of encouragement. I know it feels contrived, but to say something nice, then say something critical, then say something nice again. I'll give you an example. I know a pastor who was criticized for doing spontaneous baptisms, and he decided to pull out the baptistries and ask people right there on the spot to be baptized. And so you may not like that methodology. You may think that's, discussion should happen before people are baptized. So start the email by saying, I love your heart for unchurched people. I love your heart for seeing people come to faith in Christ. Here's my concern with that approach. That's much more easy to digest than to somebody who just immediately says, how dare you do it this way? Mm-hmm. So think about the way you open the email. Be respectful and as kind as possible.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, this is number 3, but assume that you don't know the whole story. Because more than likely you don't know the whole story, and you don't like it when people make assumptions of you when they don't know the whole story. And so, I mean, it is the golden rule of do unto others as you want done to you. So assume that that pastor has prayed over a decision. He is making the decision to the best of his knowledge.
And then the next one I would say is think before you carbon copy. There have been times as a pastor where someone sent me a scathing email and copied the chairman of the deacons. It feels unbiblical in the first step because Jesus said when we have a problem with a brother or sister, we go right to him one-on-one and we share our concerns. And then if you have resolved it, you've won a brother. Mm-hmm. So to copy another person puts the pastor immediately on defensive rather than it being a safe conversation. So there's just a couple of things to think about before you fire off that text or that email to be more reasoned and methodical in your approach.
Well, early on in your book, you said we are all being discipled by our devices. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah.
Like what you were saying there?
I think that probably strikes a nerve with some people because when we think of discipleship as Christians, we often think of becoming disciples of Christ. We're becoming more like Christ, and all of that's true. But I always come back to Romans 12:2. So Paul is talking there. He's speaking to the church, and he's saying, do not be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewal of your mind. He's assuming you are being conformed. You are being formed. You are being shaped to this world. But we're as Christians to step back and be transformed by the renewal of our mind. So we are all being discipled. We are all being shaped and formed into particular types of people. It's really a question of who's discipling us and for what purpose. Mm-hmm. And as Christians, so the question isn't, is technology shaping or discipling me? It is. It's what end and what purpose is it? Towards God, towards the renewal and transformation of your mind to become more like Christ? Mm-hmm. Or is it in the ways of the world? And I think that's where we start to see that really technology, I think it's easy for the church. We think of technology as simply a tool that we use. It's a smartphone we use, it's social media, and et cetera. And there can be good uses of technology. There can also be bad uses. And I think that kind of gets the question wrong. Because often when I talk about technology, a lot of folks will say, well, is it good or bad? Tell me. Is it good but has some bad uses, or is it bad with some good uses? I don't really think it's either. But nor is it really neutral. Neutral kind of means, well, it's not really shaping or forming me. It's not causing me to be a certain type of person. No, it's not that either. So it's not good, it's not bad, and it's not neutral. But it is shaping us. Mm. It is forming us. In particular, one of the things that I did in the book was say not only kind of what is technology, how is it forming and shaping us, but in what ways. And specifically those approaches to truth, responsibility, and identity. Not only identity as individual identity, but also as the church and what it looks like to live in a digital age. And so, yeah, we kind of step back out from just social media to really look at technology at large, because technology can be used for God-glorifying and good uses. It can be amazing. It can be amazing tools for ministries and churches, but can also be a really dangerous thing. So we have to step back and seek wisdom, which is really the thrust of the book.
Lynley and I love the way you start the book, which is with the story of reaching every morning for your phone immediately to make sure nothing has changed since 11 p.m. last night. Yeah. and all the little bings and pictures and app notifications that you get. There is something so addictive just about the phone. It's like, I went on a run this morning, and I literally ran with my phone in my hand. And I'm like, why am I running with my phone in my hand?
Yeah.
Because you feel naked without your phone now. We've become so used to it. It's like a member of the body.
Well, you were talking about it being your alarm. And so I do this every morning now, and it's so frustrating to me because I'll pick up my phone to see what time it is, but then there's a notification on it. And so then I start looking at it. And then even if I put my phone back down, I'm thinking about that notification.
Oh, yeah.
And so I cannot go back to sleep. And so, I mean, I'm not kidding you. Ben has an alarm clock beside his bed that we have had since, I think, 2001 when we got married. And it has moved with us to every house. And I make fun of him all the time, but I kind of understand why he does it, to just avoid looking at a phone.
Well, and phones remind us constantly we're not communicating enough. I feel like you talk about overwhelmed. It's like, I love when you were talking about how when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. And when you have a phone, everything's a status update.
Yeah.
How many times, like this week, my son was bathing the dogs. And I thought, I should update my status right now.
Yeah.
And Lynley and I were watching a show recently about JFK and his assassination, and he lands in Dallas and all of the things that were happening that day. And she made an interesting observation.
Well, I just said it's so interesting to see a mob group of people, all of whom are paying attention to what's happening. Like nobody had their phones up because there were no phones there.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's so weird to see a picture now with nobody holding phones up.
So I know we all want to go back to the good old days when ministry didn't involve these phones, but it's here to stay.
Yeah, and in many ways, there really weren't ever good old days. That's one of the things that I think is really funny about these conversations. Well, we need to get back to when things weren't digital because analog was better. Well, it really wasn't. We were still inundated. We were still overwhelmed. It's funny. A lot of people say, that idea of you go and take a crowd shot and everybody has their phones up. And then there's this really famous picture of an older lady and she's just sitting there with her hands crossed, kind of looking at it. And you're like, let's be like her. And yes, but in the same respect, you go back and look in the 50s and 60s and you go look at trains or kind of planes, and there's all these businessmen with papers up in front of their faces. So while they weren't looking at their screens, they were still disconnected. They still weren't connecting with one another. And so that's where I think we have to stop thinking of technology as just simply digital technologies. We have a lot of unique challenges, but I think a lot of the questions we're asking today are actually the same old questions we've always asked as humanity, but we're asking them in light of new opportunities. And so that's why I think one of the most revolutionary pieces of technology, and I write a little bit about it in the book, is actually the printing press. It changed everything about Europe. It changed everything about the church even, and the way we communicate, and it radically altered the way we see one another. And that idea about how technology alters us, it changes us, it shapes us, it disciples us, it changes how we view God. It changes how we view ourselves, and it changes how we view other people. And today we have maybe some unique challenges. We have some unique opportunities before us, but that's where I want us to stop thinking, oh, we live in such a unique time, we need to get back to yesteryear when everything was good, because then we had challenges too. And maybe some of those challenges aren't as bad as they are now, but now we have some newer challenges. And that's why it was a reminder to me, at least, and hopefully an encouragement to pastors and ministry leaders and their wives, is to say, God has created you for this moment. God has formed you, He's fashioned you, He's put you in this place and time, not to long for yesteryear or to look forward to 20 years from now, but to focus on what He has before you, because He is enough. He's the great sustainer. He's the great physician. He's the great healer. He's the great hope and comfort for what you're facing right now. And He's good enough. Often we're tempted, especially with social media, to think that God's not good enough. He's not doing for us what other people are doing, because we're just, as we said earlier, inundated with information and status updates. But that reminder of God is good enough. He has places here, and He will sustain us. It's something that really has stuck home with me, not only through my research, but even my personal life, with a lot of the things that went on in our family, with my wife's cancer diagnosis over the last few years, and then going into remission and the ups and downs with all of that. Is God is good. Yeah. He's going to sustain us, and He is preparing His church to face no matter what we face today. He is good, and He's going to walk through it with us.
I think this is so interesting what you're saying, because a couple of weeks ago we were driving down the road and there is a Judd song that says, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. And I'm like, which good old days? Like the Great Depression or,
World War II,
Vietnam. There's always been really hard times, but we we look at everything with rose-colored glasses of like, what a simpler time.
Yeah.
Well, not really. I mean, and I think about it from my perspective as a stay-at-home mom, like the good old days where we didn't have washer and dryers. And, I mean, so like I think we see it incorrectly.
And I do think we judge people. They're looking at their phone, and today's phone is yesterday's newspaper.
Yeah.
They're sitting there reading the news is what they're doing often. It's in the same way that people are reading their newspapers. His discussion about going back to the glory days was convicting to me. I find myself often wanting to go back and live in a previous generation when times were more simple. But there's a passage of Scripture, Ecclesiastes 7:10. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? It is not wise of you to ask this. I find myself, the nostalgic part of me, wanting the problems of yesteryear and not the problems of today, which is not a biblical idea or even safe or wise. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I just think there's a funny story. We took Ava to college about 4 weeks ago, and there's a mom who got on one of the college Facebook pages and said, a shout out to my mom who was able to go through life only talking to me, for 10 minutes every Sunday night from a calling card. And I so resonated with that because, I mean, we talk about technology, but man, I have the chance to talk to Ava every single day. I can see her. I mean, the other day I just said, hey, send me a picture of your face. And she sent me the cutest picture of her, drinking some hot tea. She said, I'm having a spot of tea, in a book. And it just made me so happy. And she was just able to be silly and funny. We can text and I can know when she's having not only the hard days, but the good days too. And so, I just want to be careful of always thinking back to the good old days because, man, I mean, I just know what I've processed in a month of leaving my firstborn at college. I cannot imagine what our parents went through when they just didn't know. Like, they didn't hear from us. They had no Life 360 to see where we were.
Right.
No, nothing.
I mean, remember the days when people would send a telegram?
Well, no, I don't.
But we watch movies about it, and someone died in a war, and their parents received a telegram. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to go back to those days. So getting information is a good thing, but it has to be managed. Mm-hmm. And today's discussion is a reminder to me that we live in the day, this is our, as Tim Keller calls it, our historic moment. So we embrace all of the things that God has given to us in this historic moment, and technology is one of them. One of the things we wanted to talk about with information now is the breakdown of trust.
Yeah.
You address this in your book magnificently, that because of the constant flow of information and over the last few years, references to fake news, people are more suspicious than ever of anyone that's claiming to have the facts or the truth.
Yeah.
This has impacted pastors.
Yeah.
This has impacted churches.
And a lot of public information about failures that pastors are having. That's also, I mean, I feel,
loss of credibility.
Yeah, I mean, pastors right now have a really hard time just earning credibility in their congregation. That has nothing to do with them. It's kind of that guilty until proven innocent.
Where do we go from here? How do we reestablish trust as a truth center when the church is no longer looked at from society as a trusted source of information?
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of broken promises of technology. So early on, we're told, especially with the rise of social media and things and the internet, was all of these great, we're going to all come together, we're going to have deeper connections, richer community, we're going to have more access to information. And in some ways, those things have been true. But a lot of those promises were never fulfilled, and we're starting to see some of the outworkings, the dangerous aspects, the unhealthy aspects of technology start to come out. And one of them is this, is we are naturally suspicious of anything at this point. And in some sense, it's because a lot of the things you do see are fake. They're not true. They're intentionally designed to manipulate you, to get you to do something. And often, whether it's for partisan ends or social ends or for certain ideologies or what have you, is that we're just overwhelmed with the sheer amount of information. So naturally, we start to distrust and kind of pull back a little bit. And especially on social media, where something that's obviously fake or seems obviously fake can go viral in a moment, or especially for ministry leaders where you can be attacked just relentlessly online, where it's not even fun to open up the social media app because you just see the notifications, or you're getting phone calls, or you're getting text messages, you're getting people walking into your office and just telling you all the bad things you've done, or the new things that they've seen and what you should and shouldn't be doing.
Or people text you and say, "Did you see what so-and-so said about you?"
Exactly.
And you're like, "No, but thank you."
That happened to me last week.
Yes.
That was fun.
I really don't need to see that. And that's
Yes.
one of the things that's, with my wife especially, is we try to kind of institute certain patterns in our family where she naturally wants to defend me, so I naturally don't always share some of the vitriol and some of the hate that I receive with her because it helps to protect her. But then also she kind of has my back in a lot of it too. So there's a whole host of things we can talk about, some practical things later on.
That'd be great.
But again, getting back to this kind of question of fake news and especially conspiracy theories, I've talked to countless pastors who were just overwhelmed by this, whether it's partisan related, politics, kind of election stuff, all the way up to just whether it's issues of COVID or issues of war or issues of policy, social policies, etc. We're just overwhelmed by this stuff. And so one of the things that I think it's tempting to do is kind of to pull back and to not speak when we should be speaking or to speak when we shouldn't be. And I think that's one of the ways, the subtle ways that technology is kind of forming and shaping us, is that we feel that we feel like we always have to speak our opinion. We always have to give our thoughts. And in some ways, as leaders, we're expected to have an opinion on everything. Well, one of the great lies of technology is that you should or could. I mean, it's really funny to me in the last, few years, you start to see one day people are virologists and epidemiologists. The next day they're lawyers. The next day they're pastors. The next day they're this, they're that, and the other. And we're simply ill-equipped to do that. And so often the ways that these technology, specifically social media, is that they encourage us to post our unformed thoughts, to post kind of random connections or whatever kind of comes into our mind, or to immediately react to something as it comes out.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
Because this is such an important topic. I think one of the hardest things in leadership is to not overreact or underreact. Mm-hmm. So in my position, I'm constantly being told to post something, share my thoughts on something. I've just yet to see success in setting the record straight online.
Yeah.
I've yet to see success in it. So where ministry families feel stuck is we are accused of things, we are misunderstood, and if we put our side of the story online, it seems to only make it worse.
They can.
So
But is it always? We can just go ahead and have a fight here, here on
let's
the air.
do it. Lynley is always like, say something. You know the truth.
I'm not always saying say something. I know what you're saying. There are times where you should not say something, and I don't. But I think every once in a while, the battle that we have is that every once in a while I do want to say something. It sounds like maybe like your wife, and he adamantly just says, I'm not entering into this conversation. And so even in our household, we don't know how to handle it. Like, do you have practical advice for that?
Well, part of it is that you don't have to have an immediate thought or to react in the moment. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the temptations in our digital age that's actually the most dangerous.
I better jump in there now.
Is that we have to address it this moment. Mm-hmm. Whether it's something that comes across our news feed and we feel like we have to react to, or it's an attack and we feel like we have to set the record straight. And that doesn't mean this, one of the things that I talk about in the book and kind of hopefully will communicate to folks is that there isn't just a checklist. There isn't just this is exactly what you do. It's cultivating wisdom. And so it's what I'm hoping is not so much to bind someone's conscience and say you must do this in this situation, as much as how do we step back and cultivate wisdom? Well, the wise thing in that moment may be to respond, but it may not be. Mm-hmm. But the speed at which we're encouraged to do it often is not wise. And so we have to be able to step back. We have to have other people, whether it's a wife or a ministry team or elders, to come around and say, hold on, how are we going to address this? How should we think about this? And doing it with community rather than isolated individuals. And so whether it's kind of that random troll online that always seems to come after you, sometimes it's best just to mute and move on. Mm-hmm. Like, don't engage it. You don't have to engage every criticism, but there are times when it does kind of rise to that level. It feels like that you have other people saying, maybe you should say something, or maybe you should speak to this. And sometimes that's in the moment and quick, and other times that's a little bit more methodical. But again, it's kind of stepping back and asking those questions of wisdom, of what's the best thing to do in this situation, not only the truth that we need to speak, but also the way in which we communicate that truth. I think one of the beautiful things of this is that this often doesn't make headline news, is when the situations are done well. We often see the situations that are done poorly, and that's what makes the news, because that's what is kind of designed on social media. It gets more engagement, whether good or bad, and it starts to go viral. So a lot of times this is happening behind closed doors, not in the sense of isolated kind of individuals, but in the midst of just the body of Christ. And I've seen a lot of pastors be able, whether they're admitting failures to their people and saying, hey, I made a bad decision here. This isn't what I should have done. But they're often doing that with the community and with other people around them, but also doing so with just a humble spirit and remembering that. I always talk to my students of a bigger concept called epistemic humility, and that's a really fancy word basically to say you don't know everything that you think you know. You simply are ill-equipped to do that. And so recognizing our fallenness, recognizing our weakness, it can help us to process a lot of those things with humility and admit when we're wrong.
Yeah. Jason, one of the things we try to do in the Glass House is always connect the challenges of ministry to a core emotion.
Yeah.
Like the emotional experience of being a pastor or pastor's wife. When it comes to the information flow, I think it's fear. Mm-hmm. Well, where is that fear coming from, Lynley? What's your perspective?
Well, I get fearful when I don't know how to handle something. And I feel like there's pressure too. Like there's expectations that I should know how to handle something, but I don't. And so I think sometimes the best thing we can do is to admit, we talked about that in an episode with Steve Cuss, that sometimes the best thing to do is just say, I've never done this before. The digital age is ever evolving. And so I'm learning as you guys are, and I would love some grace as we try to figure this out together. Because like you said, Jason, there's really good things that come out of it. And so we want to steward our church through this evolving digital age really well, but I don't know how to do that. And so let's figure it out together. And like you said, let's get a group of people who can do that, because one person can't figure that out by himself. And so, I just think there's so much fear here of what should I say? When should I say it? What's my wife going to think? What's my staff going to think? What's the church going to think? There's so many questions.
That's really good. And there was an episode with Rich Velotis where he was talking about why pastors burn out. And he used the passage where Peter says, silver and gold I have not, but what I have I give to you. And what causes burnout is when we try to give to people that which we don't have. I feel like the information thing pushes us into that corner of burnout when we're constantly being asked to react to situations that we really don't have wisdom on.
Yeah.
We haven't had a chance to form an intelligent opinion on it, but they need you to respond. They need you to say something. So how do you encourage ministry leaders who are in the day-to-day firefighting? What practical steps do you give them?
I think a lot of it will come down to, as we've talked about cultivating wisdom, but as you said, Lynley, I think we also need to cultivate humility. Humility will state not only that, I don't know exactly how to respond in this situation, but I'm also going to fail at times. I'm not going to respond perfectly. And I think that's one of the things that we can do is social media talks about, encourages us to have a platform and to speak to every issue and to always be thinking about how other people are viewing us and whether we're on the right tribe or saying the right thing or interacting with the right people in the right way, is kind of stepping back and saying, you know what, I'm going to try to admit that I'm going to fail, not only in kind of reminding myself that I need to be humble, I'm not going to live up to my own expectations, but remembering where our true identity is. And I think that's one of the reasons I wrote the last chapter of the book is about pursuing identity in a polarized age, because we're encouraged, given the amount of information we're exposed to each day, to pick a side, to pick a tribe. This is something Alan Jacobs talks about in a book about how to think. He talks about the temptation to lump. And what he means by lumping is the simple idea that we tend to, because we can't process the amount of information, we start to lump things together, even if they're not exactly the same. So, you have to be one of those type of people. You have to, you must believe in kind of you're on this tribe or you're on this team or what have you. And sometimes, people are a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And so being reminded, not only in community, that we don't have it all together. We don't always have to perform. We don't always have the right answer in the moment, and doing that in community with one another, but also reminding people where our true identity is that we don't have to perform. We don't have to show off. We don't have to be a certain type of person because of who we already are. And more importantly, whose we already are, meaning we're Christ. We're in Christ. That's our true identity. And so no matter what we face, the challenges we face is kind of stepping back and being reminded, I'm God's child. I'm one that Christ went to the cross to save. And that's where my true identity is. And then as we see in the body of Christ, as we come together as people. And so it's one of those things that I wish I had here's 7 steps to fix everything, but I just don't. And part of that is because that's not really the nature of wisdom. Yeah. And the nature of kind of pursuing humility, but also pursuing our identity not only in Christ, but also as the body of Christ. And specifically, even, in the marital relationship is that sometimes my wife is right and I don't want to admit it. Sometimes I'm right and she doesn't want to admit it. And sometimes we need outside counsel to help us think through and process some of those things because neither of us are thinking about it right. And that's where I think one of the big temptations, again, in the digital age is to go faster, 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 to be more efficient in every single aspect of our life. But wisdom calls us to be slow. As James 1:19 says, to be slow to speak and quick to listen, slow to react. And that's something that's very countercultural, is to step back, ask some of the hard questions, slow down and seek counsel of other people, to not go as fast as possible, but to be as wise as possible.
Can I add something here? Because we do have a lot of church goers who listen to this who are not in ministry. I think that advice would be so... Gosh, I just would have loved it in our church if people would have responded slowly as well. Because we're so fast in response that sometimes, Ben would make a decision and just immediately the phones would light up without them maybe processing, hang on, that's not the heart of the guy I know. Like the guy who's preaching, something here feels off. And we don't even use our discernment anymore. We just immediately assume that whatever was said was truth. And so, for the layperson that's listening, I do think that would be so encouraging to your pastor, whoever that is to say, when I hear something that maybe doesn't ring the bell of truth, process it for a little bit.
Yeah,
and then go to him. Go to that guy instead of, getting on, social media and saying, did anybody hear this? Anybody else hear it, kind of thing.
It makes me think about the passage of Scripture in the Old Testament with David and Nabal when he is treated rudely. And he gets so incited, he's ready to go grab a sword and kill this guy. Abigail intercepts him and rescues him from making a huge rash moment of anger.
And she calls him a fool.
And she said, don't mind my husband, he's an idiot, is basically what she says. But that story reminds me of how I respond sometimes when I see things on social media that get me fired up.
Yeah.
I want to rush to the scene and put this thing to bed, when sometimes the best thing to do is to get a night's sleep or two before forming any conclusions. Yeah. And Lynley and I talk about this on the show. We can both be fired up kind of people.
It's not we can both be. We are. You always soft pedal it I think I'm fiery.
I know it. But let's call fire down on people's heads kind of disciples. Mm-hmm. And social media and digital age is not, it's a dangerous thing.
It can be. Especially because that one random thought that you have, or that one random tweet that you send out, or that response, or that quote tweet, or what have you, it can be seen by nobody, or it can be seen by millions of people all around the world. It always reminds me, it's one of those great fears of tweeting right before you turn off your phone. And there was this story of a lady who tweeted about something, and I don't remember exactly what it was. She quote tweeted something kind of silly and sarcastic, which is, on a side note, sarcasm doesn't translate well on social media, so avoid it, I would encourage you. But anyway, she tweeted something sarcastic, got on a plane for a 6 or 7 hour flight, came back, and she had been essentially canceled. I mean, it had gone massively viral in that 6 hours. By the time she landed, she couldn't correct the record, and she had lost her job and everything over it because of a simple little tweet. And so I think that's something that ministry leaders have to keep in mind, is that it's okay not to be on every single social media platform. It's okay not to respond to every single thing, often because what we need to be doing is a lot of that more in-person kind of visceral relationships, building relationships, preaching, teaching, studying, doing the quiet, hard work that people aren't always going to see. But that doesn't negate the fact that we do have to sometimes respond in the moment. We do have to correct the record. We have to speak to something very, very clearly. And I think we, again, do that with counsel with other people so that we're not making rash decisions that not only affect ourselves, but more importantly, affect other people, and especially the institutions or our organizations that we lead.
So that kind of leads into the question of how do people unplug when it's so difficult to unplug?
Yeah.
And there's an expectation that you're not unplugged.
Yeah. One of the things I think we need to do is kind of reset some of those expectations with our teams, with our church ministry staffs, or even with our families. And so it's not something I won't sit up here and tell you hey, we figured it out. This is kind of what you need to do to unplug, because it's very, very difficult to do that. But one of the things that if you notice, even sitting around this table, we all have our phones within about a foot of us at all times. And so much so that's not even close enough. Now we have watches. I have an Apple Watch on my wrist that buzzes every once in a while and tells me some notifications. So I'm turning notifications off. One of the things that I've done just to set healthier patterns in my life, and I'm probably going to change this pretty dramatically even in the next few weeks, is I have what's called downtime on my phone, meaning from 8:30 at night until 7 o'clock in the morning, I can't access social media. It's kind of life-giving, actually. One, because there's really nothing of value during those hours anyway, and it keeps me from looking at it right before bed and the moment I wake up. I can do other things. There was the documentary from years ago called The Social Dilemma that a lot of people watch, but one of the interviewees said, it's not a question, do you check Twitter in the morning? It's, do you check it before your feet hit the ground or while you're using the restroom? And that idea that we like wake up with these things is to have that kind of moment where I'll get up at about 5 a.m. to work and to read and to write. And for about 2 hours, I don't even have to think about social media. So that's a little thing that I do each day. But then I'm also trying to get into a better habit. And I say trying, my wife, if she's listening to this, is laughing. But I'm trying to disconnect and put my phone in the other room during the day when we're hanging out with the kids or whatever. And another thing I do when we do take a vacation is I don't wear my Apple Watch. Maybe I want the steps or whatever, or I think I'm just like, it's not worth it. I need to actually disconnect. And so those are some of the things I think we can do, whether it's instituting little patterns and using some little technology, gadgets or whatever to have a better rhythms in our life. But then also having those moments where we try to actually disconnect and actually tell our team, like, look, I'm actually stepping back and I want you to do this as well. But you're in charge right now. You know how to reach me if something really bad happens, but you can actually handle a lot more than you think you can, and empowering our teams to do that. So it's not just the solo leader who has to do everything, is that you're actually building that team of people who are responsible and that make these decisions together.
I think talking about fear is important, though, because we've all had that moment where we did turn our phone off and something happened.
Yeah.
Recently, I was in a meeting and I was trying really hard to focus because I can get really distracted. And I set my phone aside and something in our family kind of blew up. And somebody needed a document or something in a very timely manner. And I was completely offline. Yeah. And there's that sunk feeling that when you look at your phone, like, I totally blew an opportunity to help out my daughter or my wife. And it's hard in this generation we live in where people do expect you to be quite responsive. Maybe not, you're not going to text me back in the next 30 seconds, but in the next 10 minutes. Yeah. Or in the next 20 minutes. And sometimes there's longer periods of time have to be endured, and it's just hard to balance.
Yeah, and I think one of the things on that especially is I love the do not disturb feature on my phone. And the reason is because if somebody calls one time, it doesn't go through. But if you call twice and you're on my contact list, you can set up some different rules. It goes through.
I need to set that up.
And that way, if you're getting multiple phone calls or something like that, but also setting expectations, not only but just family, but even church staff and even church members, to say, there are going to be times where I'm actually not reachable, and that's okay. Like, you need the same thing for your life as well. But again, I'll typically, have it on do not disturb but I also turn off a lot of notifications because I genuinely do not need to know the score of the game in that moment. I don't actually need to know that I have another new email in that moment, or another text message or something in that very moment.
I think to kind of wrap this up, it comes down to the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
Do you really believe that while that phone is away from your body, that God's in control and that it's all going to be okay? The fear is everything's riding or depending on me.
Yeah.
And we've gotten more and more addicted to that sense of control and that sense of, I've got to be available. People need me at all times. And weaning ourselves off that may be the greatest challenge of our day.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true in kind of the digital age that we inhabit, is everything's about me. Whether it's my phone, it's my device, it's my app, it's my, Netflix queue, it's my Amazon shopping cart. It's all about me, 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 me. And being reminded that actually this world is not about you. It reminds me of John 3:30. It's I must decrease so that he might increase.
Yep.
It's that, do we have a God-centered perspective or do we have a man-centered perspective? And that's really not only in the digital age and the technologies we face, it's really just the challenge of life today in general. Do we have a God-centered perspective and worldview, or do we have a man-centered perspective and worldview? And I think often we can delude ourselves in very godly language, or even with sometimes godly intentions. It's still all about me, and about me performing, about me being involved, about me having a platform, about me, when it's actually about God. And that's the beauty of wisdom. That's the beauty of the wisdom literature, just reminding actually it's about God. And so the wisdom literature, specifically like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, is reminding us of the glories of God, who he is and what he's said and done, and also how he's made us in his image and how he calls us to live in this world. So it reminds us not only of having the right beliefs, but also the right actions that are centered on God and not on ourselves.
Jason, it's so great to talk with you. Every time I'm around you, I can tell you've spent so much time thinking carefully on this subject. And your book, Following Jesus in a Digital Age, is a fantastic resource. We encourage all pastors and wives to check that out. And then a Bible study coming out this fall with Lifeway in December. Same title, Following Jesus in a Digital Age. So thanks for coming on The Glass House, and thanks for having this conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to the show? It gives us insight into what you like, and it helps others find the show as well. The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.